Hi, everyone. Welcome to the August 21st meeting of the IPython/Jupyter project. We have a few of the regulars missing due to various travel issues and vacation and whatnot, but we still have enough that I think we can make progress with the agenda. So, should we get started with Matthias at this point?
Yeah, sure. With IPython mailing list being down for a week, I thought that maybe we should also at some point create a Jupyter mailing list for things that are purely Jupyter stuff.
Yeah, I've thought about it. I don't know what I'm kind of half and half on keeping lists more kind of less lists is better versus yes, it might be useful to have it segregated. I mean, we sort of moved to unifying the IPython user and dev list into one, precisely because we sort of wanted to have a single space for the conversation. But at the same time, maybe it is. I don't know. How do people feel about it? I honestly almost toss a coin on that decision. I don't feel like I have a strong argument one way or the other.
Yeah, it's one of those things where there's not enough discussion yet to really justify another list.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, if we wait until there is enough discussion that it's annoying on the IPython list, then that's not awesome either. I don't know. At the very least, I would like to not put it on scipy.org.
Mm-hmm.
Given the last few days, I would like nothing to be on scipy.org if possible. But at the very least, a new thing should not be added.
Could we alias something to, for now, IPython mailing list, so that when there is really a lot of traffic, it's just a matter of analyzing?
Yes.
Oh.
I don't know that we can. I mean, we'd have to go and mess with the scipy.org mailx records and all that, right, Kyle? You're probably of us. You're the one who knows the most about that stuff.
Yes.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No.
I was going to say that, like, we actually already have a mail server set up, just because Jenkins is using it. I mean, it's basically just using Mailgun. It would not be hard for us to set up the right MX records to point somewhere else. Yeah.
To set up a mailing list name that points to, but the issue is if people subscribe to, I don't know how aliasing works with mailing lists, because there's the issue of the actual mailing list manager knows who subscribed and all that. There's kind of a layer of access control on mailing lists, which is a little bit different from being a plain old aliasing / forwarding. It doesn't really completely work, I think, with mailing lists. I would say let's just wait until maybe when we have a repo that is actually when we do the repo surgery and kind of Jupyter becomes the main project, we can say, okay, let's use this as an opportunity to create that mailing list. And
Sure.
Yeah, because I think for at least, I don't know, 3 to 5 years where we create the Jupyter mailing list, a significant amount of Jupyter-specific questions will come on IPython user.
Yeah.
So.
We can dev.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable time to do it.
Next, Mozilla Festival. Kyle, yes, go.
Okay. So I started a proposal draft. I actually didn't get to come back to it, so it's like only a few lines. I guess I'm curious for anybody that's gone before or has talked there, like what their experience was like and what. No. Okay. So first one.
No idea. Never.
Well, I guess I'll ask Dana. I think we had people that went last year and did OpenStack stuff, so I'll ask around. Paul was saying that
in terms of materials, you could use the IPython in-depth repo has a bunch of stuff, and so feel free to grab anything that you want from that repo. Right? That's kind of our to-go repo for extended in-depth tutorials.
Okay, yeah, I was thinking of just ripping from the SciPy tutorials. Paul was saying it's probably a lighter audience, and to like not make it too broad. And I feel like if anything, like I'm gonna end up going over some of the like SciPy stack as part of it, because the notebook itself isn't the power. It's like the rest of it combined.
So if you want to go over that, keep in mind that the gallery has at the top several really good intros to the SciPy stack. Right, there's the one by J.R. Johansson, that's like 7 or 8 notebooks. There's one by Rick Mueller, which is a single notebook. It's called a crash course, a scientific computing crash course, or Python crash course for scientists, or something like that, from Rick Mueller from Sandia, which is a single notebook that is a very nice kind of top-to-bottom intro to NumPy, SciPy, Matplotlib, done in the notebook, has a little bit of Python as well. So that's another one that could potentially be useful. But there's several good materials there that that you might find valuable.
Yeah, so I guess if I point people towards those, and I kind of have like an introductory section, maybe even just make it about Jupyter, kind of in general, and about the Jupyter notebooks. I'm really not sure of that angle. At the very least, I think.
How much time total do you have? 1 hour total?
I have no idea.
How do they ask you to put together a proposal without knowing whether it's 1 hour or 3 or 4? Those are very different things.
Yes. So when I look at the page for it, for the session, yeah, they don't say on the session proposal pages.
Is there a tentative schedule?
Session times can vary from 30 minutes to 2 hours. So I guess I'm framing how long in the proposal.
Okay. Yeah, well, you request something, and I guess they'll have to juggle when they put together the final schedule. They'll have to juggle sort of how much time to allocate to anybody.
It seems like there are at least 2 other groups that asked if we could join them as part of their sessions. Arfon, and then someone from Authoria. Both of them asked if we could help too. So it seems like there's going to be a lot of presence for the notebook. So if this is just an introductory section, I guess 30 minutes is probably okay.
I would still do. I mean, it depends on whether you want to give a high-level talk or whether you want people to play with it a little bit. Because
I think maybe I should at least make sure that people have it installed and running on their laptops. And so maybe an hour is good, since that takes some time. Yeah.
So, yeah, if you want people to have it and to play with it a little bit, then one thing you want to do is you want to give those instructions in advance, because downloading 50 people on a crowded Wi-Fi, downloading Anaconda or Canopy all at the same time, or even app-getting a bunch of stuff at the same time is a recipe for disaster. So if you want people to have it, do something with it in the room, then you're going to have them install it in advance.
But what if I just create like 200 notebook servers, each with their own password and an IP or a domain on a piece of paper? And
So
I hand them that.
the issue with that, I've been in tutorials that do that. The issue is typically that the quality of the Wi-Fi is always less than you think it will be. And so, so if everybody was on wired Ethernet, that would work. If everybody is on Wi-Fi, I have been in tutorials that do exactly that. They give everybody an Amazon cluster up and running, and they hand out little pieces of paper with the specific, exactly what you just said, and it's great in principle. And then you're typing with a character echo lag of about 1 character per like 10 seconds, and it's just atrocious.
So I guess what I was thinking was I would have people install it, but the backup plan would be a fleet of servers.
You could do that if you try to have most people install it, and you do have a fleet of, and you try to push everyone towards the local installation in advance, and then you have backup servers available. That may give you enough And what I would do is I would focus. In 1 hour, you're actually not going to cover a lot, I promise you.
Okay.
So I would just focus on the basics. Don't try to cover a bunch of, I mean, maybe do a simple matplotlib plot, load a CSV file, basically a repo that has a CSV file from some download, like stock data or anything from Yahoo Finance, load it in pandas, plot it, print some stuff, do some typing, load a YouTube video, do a couple of the basic, kind of the most basic things, getting people up and running, understanding the model of code versus results versus what part is documentation, the notion of changing cell types from text to code for execution, just making sure that people understand that basic model, the notion that it's a web app, but it can run locally, the distinction between running in locally and running remotely. That alone, if you actually do things with people and you make a new notebook and you show them how to make a new cell, I promise you, you'll go through an hour. And in terms of actual content, doing little more than basic Python printing, typing a list, doing a simple loop, defining a function in one cell and using it in the cell below so that they realize that it's the same namespace. A very, very simple Python pandas, matplotlib examples. Sorry, guys, I have to actually take this.
Okay.
Cool. Thanks.
All right, moving on, I guess. Yeah. Does any other folks have comments? Yeah, an hour is not very long.
Okay. Cool. That's good to know.
Yeah. I mean, I run out of time doing a parallel tutorial in 4 hours. So that's one. That's assuming everybody knows everything about IPython.
And everybody still wanted more.
Yeah. So you really, in 20 minutes, you really just get to talk, and in an hour, you get to talk and demo and exercise maybe. Like.
Okay. Yeah.
Like you don't really get to cover much more material than you do in a 20-minute talk.
I guess it seems like the format with the sessions is that they want people to interact with each other too, and sometimes split off into groups. So even if it was 2 hours and everybody kind of tackles a little problem,
yeah,
that would be good too.
Yeah.
And then what do you think to me just saying yes to every single session that asks for me to come join them?
Until that becomes a problem for either your job or your household.
Well, no, so it's all at most best. So it's other people that are also submitting sessions.
Yeah.
They're like, hey, do you want to join us to help with this one?
Oh, just helping out?
Yeah.
No.
You should have a different schedule.
What's that?
I mean, if we are in separate slots, yes, but we might be in the same slot.
So I guess I'll just tell Caitlin and ask her what she thinks.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, that's it.
Okay.
So this next section, Brian added, but Brian's obviously not here. I think he started adding this in the context of that add class and remove class deprecation type work we were doing with the widget framework. So I don't know what your guys' opinions are on this, but it looks like he's trying to have a formal way of deprecating features.
Well, yeah, just to kind of formalize, because we're not super consistent about deprecating things. Sometimes we'll deprecate things that, or sometimes we'll have deprecation warnings on things that are actually broken, and sometimes. But I think part of what he wants to formalize is that when we release stuff like MBconvert in 1.0 and widgets in 2.0, we are specifically releasing them in kind of, this is a preview state, and we're not committing to a single API. That between 1.0 and 2.0 for MBconvert, there were no deprecations because every single thing was broken.
Changed.
And I think Brian wants to formalize that we're doing the same thing with widgets between 2 and 3.
And do we have any ideas of how we can go about doing that, or should we just wait till he's here?
Well, mainly it's we want to, and I mean from the bullets he wrote are, we've got these provisional things, and just kind of write a document that actually describes what we mean by these things, and then we can publicize, is what's been clear to us but not been clear to anybody
else.
Anybody who's actually affected is that widgets are in a provisional state right now, and people get to learn to use them. But we, while people are learning, getting started with them, we're finding out all these things that should be different, and we don't need to. It's not appropriate to jump through hoops to maintain compatibility with a provisional implementation.
That makes sense. Fernando, are you back?
I am back.
We were just talking about deprecation. Formalizing deprecation.
Yes. Okay. So this would be
In particular, formalizing the fact that the notion of provisional things, examples including NB convert in 1.0 and widgets in 2.0, that we specifically do not deprecate between a provisional release and a stable one.
And this is following the PEP 411 policy that you linked to there, which is what Python does.
Yeah.
No, I think we can. I think that's a perfectly sensible policy. What Python dev uses, and I think if we just point people and say we do the same thing that Python dev does. I mean, a lot of our practices we kind of follow the lead of Python core, and I think that's.
Yeah, and so in that case, I'm not sure we really need to do IPEPs to describe. I think we can just add a doc. I don't know exactly where. And then make sure that when we're doing provisional stuff, we note that in what's new.
That it is provisional.
Yeah, because it being provisional doesn't actually help if people don't know.
Don't know that it's provisional. No, that makes sense.
If someone wants to write it up as an I'm not sure that an IPEP is really necessary, but it should be written down in docs. Somewhere.
And it should be written down in several places. For example, in provisional modules, the source code should have a very clear header at the top, and even if it takes a little bit of cleanup if we decide to keep it later, but having plastered in the docs kind of a warning box at the top that stands out.
So maybe the IPEP process for describing our process, I guess, of communicating that things are provisional is worthwhile.
Sure, maybe that's a good idea. That's a good point. But it can be a very, very simple one.
Yeah. Just enumerating the ways in which we communicate to people that things are provisional and the ways in which things go from provisional to not. Yeah. Straightforward.
Okay. Onward.
NB format 4. There's just a few last little bits, I think, before it goes fully into I'm complete and just review the giant thing. The first question is the removal of worksheets has put cells alphabetically before metadata, which means that metadata is now at the end of the file rather than the beginning. This does not actually affect when question this is brought up is if you want to sniff the metadata and do operations without reading the whole file. It's not really less efficient to sniff from the end than it is from the beginning of a file. So this doesn't actually really affect that other than a naive just read from 0.
Yeah, a progressive JSON parser we have issued to sniff from the end, right?
But just this Does
hold
one
on.
exist in Python?
What did Matthias say?
A progressive JSON reader that
Mhm.
can will have difficulties to sniff from the end. Whereas if we try to write one from the beginning, it can just stop as soon as metadata is done, which is difficult to do from the end.
Mhm.
Yeah, so I think if we really want metadata at the front of the file, we should change the data structure, and I don't think relying on alphabetical sorting is really worth doing. Because if you want to sniff, you can sniff from the end of the file without reading the whole file.
The question is, do we try to sort the key with metadata first?
I wouldn't. But that's, yeah, so that's still, I think, a bit of an open question. My current leaning is to leave it where it is with cells called cells. Because remember, all this metadata sniffing remains hypothetical.
It's annoying that file systems really took sort of that Unix one.
Yeah.
Instead of
no. Max had great metadata before OS 10. Max had great file system metadata before OS 10. But
I know.
Of course, that metadata did not survive shared files, so there were problems with file system metadata. Because when you move something from one file system to another, that metadata is usually lost.
Yeah.
So there's a reason the simple dumb way won. But
I know.
Yeah.
And the internet kind of sealed that deal because the internet exposed the byte stream model basically.
But if we think sniffing a header is important, we can make the data structure such that actually happens.
Sure.
You just use an ordered data structure and not a dictionary. You use a list.
Yeah.
Like this is the header that is small and at the top, and the second element is all the rest of the crap that gets huge.
Yeah.
Which we can do.
I'm not convinced that that's a high price to pay.
Yes, that is a high price. Yeah.
That's a high price to pay. I am not completely convinced that it's worth it. I mean, being able to get the metadata without reading whole files is certainly nice if it came for free. If we could make it happen easily with very low cost, I think it would be nice.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not convinced that it's worth changing completely the data structure.
Maybe it will be a feature that is available on some storage and not others. I mean, when we have database storage like Google Drive, maybe Google Drive can give the metadata, or maybe not.
Yeah, I mean, if you drop a notebook in MongoDB or something, you wouldn't have an issue.
Yeah, in a Mongo style store.
Yeah. Any document style database.
You would embed the top-level dict basically as key value pairs.
Mm-hmm.
That's what your document would be, the top-level key value pairs, and therefore the metadata would be a first-level entity that you could vary right away. Yeah, I mean, in hindsight, it's one of those things. Thinking about it, and I like the way you put it, Min, which is basically if we want to think of this as a header plus rest, then the data structure should be basically a list that has the first thing is the header and the second thing is the rest. So in hindsight, I probably would have leaned in that direction if we were thinking about that today. But given what we already have kind of out on the ground,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not convinced it's worth paying the price of revamping the entire data structure model. It's going to anybody who has written any scripts, any code that handles these things manually, we're going to break all that for very little gain. So
mm-hmm. Yeah. So my current inclination is to just leave it as cells. But if someone feels more strongly that the alphabetical sorting is more valuable than I think it is, then I can make that change.
Well, but then we also have the argument that even if we were to rename it from cells to something that came after the letter M, we may still not be able to trust that it's going to come first because different
you'll never be able to trust it. But what fraction of notebook documents are written by our NB format code?
Yeah, probably the vast majority.
Pretty close to 100%. So the fact that, right, and the cost of someone who wrote it with unordered keys it would just mean it's inefficient for some notebooks. If you're using a streaming JSON processor or something, it's just going to get there faster, but it's still going to get there if they're unordered.
Yeah.
So you don't lose functionality, you just lose efficiency for things written in other ways. So it wouldn't break things. It would just say, if you don't write them the same way we do, some operations will be less efficient. Remaining hypothetical operations that don't exist yet.
I mean, anyway, if one day we decide to sniff metadata, we can still go for the ordered dict and put metadata first.
Oh, you mean in memory use an ordered dict as a data structure and rely?
If you instead of dumping JSON, you dump ordered dict of JSON and sort with a reverse order, it dumps metadata first.
Okay.
So the change to have the metadata first in the file is 2 lines of code. I mean, for our implementation.
It seems like nobody is pushing hard for the name worksheets, and it is longer, and that means it's code that we have to have in a bunch of places. Should we go with cells?
Great. It doesn't seem like anybody has a strong inclination for it to be anything else. So I'm +1 on the code as it already is, so I don't have to do that big find replace it. Okay. The next 2 things are making a notebook for MB format outputs matching the message spec. Stream outputs have keys. Name and data. MB format has keys. Stream and text, meaning the same thing. I don't quite know why they started out different, but currently in the PR, I just changed NB format 4 to match the message spec. So stream outputs are now name and data. Perhaps slightly preferable would be to make both the messages and the output name and text. I don't have, but that would mean a change in both the message spec and NB format. We are changing both in IPython 3, so we can do that.
Well, since we're changing both, it means all the kernels are going to have to adapt, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, eventually, because we have the adapter code, the pressure is not so high.
Okay.
So all the current, I mean, if anybody's using a kernel, I don't think there are any other kernels using message spec 5. They're all using message spec 4, and they just work with IPython master and transparently because of the adapter code. But yeah, so it's a question of the NB format affects people writing some custom JavaScript and a lot of custom NB convert templates. And the message spec affects people writing kernels.
Yeah. Can we? How complicated is it to put equivalent? That's harder, right? These are templates. Put equivalent adapter code for NB convert.
For this one, it would not be complicated at all. In general, to allow NB convert to work with v3 would be very complicated.
Okay. So NB convert templates are still going to have to be adapted to some extent.
Yes.
No,
it's a big change, yeah. And NB convert templates need to change dramatically. Pretty much all of them.
Notebook will be migrated to v4 when they are loaded for NB convert, so all the templates should be for v4.
Yes.
Whatever happened.
Yes, I think Fernando is asking, is there a way to make it less painful for people who have custom templates?
Yes, that was my question.
Yeah, and for the simple case of the stream output key renaming, you could just say, you could just duplicate the data. Stream.text equals stream.data, stream.stream equals stream.name, and then both things would work. But the same thing can't be said for the node. Some of the other transforms are more complex. So I think it would be harder to do that in general than it is to do it in particular.
So the question is, do we make, because in this case I'm sort of inclined to choosing the names that are cleanest for the long run, since this is probably the last time that we want to make these kinds of changes. So picking the ones that are really the cleanest solution from a naming perspective.
Yeah, I think it's fairly clear that name is better than stream. Stream.stream is kind of weird. Text seems ever so slightly better than data. So I went with data because I was changing one thing instead of two things. But if people think text is better than data, then, or if people think something else is better, then they can go with that too.
Data just seems more general than text. I think it's...
Yeah, but it's also, stream data is by definition text.
Text.
Yeah.
But also, it's related to the second one, all outputs might have a data attribute if we leave it as data. Which might be a positive or a negative, but given that it will have a totally different structure than rich data.
Yeah, because these are regular standard in, standard out streams. Those streams are not, well, is there anything that sensibly produces binary output on standard out?
You can pipe binary data to stuff. The message spec enforces that the data on streams is Unicode.
It's text. Okay.
So our message spec guarantees that this is text.
Okay, then I think we should call it text. Because if we are really actually encoding it as Unicode, that is kind of the definition. Yeah. That is the definition of text, right? Unicode is not for bytes. Unicode is something that was designed for languages, for human languages that have text. So I think it should be called text.
Okay, so name and text.
Okay, so then the only remaining question is, is it worth the effort of putting a little bit of adapter logic in NB-convert for a while so that we can kind of soften the blow in case anybody has custom templates? And if we're going to follow our don't break user space as much as possible mantra, I would say yes. Min, do you think it's not the end of the world to do that?
I will investigate it. I think it's going to be tricky, but not impossible. And the way I would do it, there's two ways I see doing that. One is you upgrade to NB format 4, and basically, since it is just a dict, we just copy data around, or you're not copying data, you're copying keys. So all the various key renames and everything, you just copy that to those old places rather than moving, so that two different accesses both work. Or three options. One, you just copy it and it transparently works. Second is you add like shim access so that you get a deprecation warning, but it still works. And the third one is we have some way of having templates say, I'm actually a V3 template, convert the notebook to V3 before giving it to me.
Yeah, I wonder. I actually want that. That's a good point. I wonder if moving forward we shouldn't do that. If we shouldn't in general kind of have the notion of what, because the template machinery and the conversion machinery really is
dependent
document, and so it's inevitably going to be tied to this. And I wonder if we shouldn't maybe, even if we haven't done it up until now, but maybe we should specify and even print a warning whenever we load a template that doesn't have a version spec. We should say, we should try to use it, assume that it's current, but basically print a warning.
Or if we, if we say if we define from now on templates have a version spec, the logical interpretation of no version is the last version that doesn't have a version.
Yeah.
So
3.0.
right.
Yeah.
And that's actually what we do with the message spec, is that when we added the message spec version, the adapter says if it doesn't have a version, assume it's v4, which is the last version that doesn't require that it has a version as a part of the spec.
I don't think it's possible to
Why don't
add
we add that
information like.
I think that's a good idea, because if in the future we make more significant changes, that'll make it a lot more robust, and it'll let us give.
Yeah. Although
Yeah.
I don't know how to do this because all of our templates will obviously be v4 only. And the way people write custom templates is they say, extends HTML and then do some custom stuff.
Oh, that's true.
They can't say extends HTML and change everything to v3 instead of v4. I don't know that there's, because they're not creating an entire custom template. They're creating usually a pretty small subclass, which is why I think the shim thing, because part of the reason for nvformat.current is it means we don't have to write any code anywhere that handles the differences between notebook versions.
Yeah, then you need to have a special loader that search the template and load it, and before returning the red template on disk, it needs to do some pre-processing to check if the template is the right version, and then abort if it's the wrong version.
Yeah, but even so, since all of our templates will be v4, and all custom templates are subclasses of our templates,
Parent.
all existing custom templates will be v4 templates.
No, because when you read, when you have the extend, before returning those bytes, you can read it and check that it's a v4 or v3. Because basically,
if we use v3, our templates, which their templates are based on, will not work. So it won't even walk the notebook structure.
Yeah, but you can raise there and say that there is a wrong template, which is a wrong version.
Yeah, but I don't know how anybody would write a v3 template against the next version of IPython. They would have to add. It would have to be from scratch with all the skeleton walking and everything, which nobody's ever done.
Yeah, but then you should raise a template that already exists and that will be used for v4. So if there is already a template written, you want to warn users that our templates have changed.
Oh, I see. You just want a better error than the attribute error that you'll get right now.
Yeah.
I think.
This is a little tricky.
Yeah, it is. I think the first thing I will look into is the shim with a warning, because I think that kind of gets at both things. That it'll still work, but it will tell people that if they try to access this attribute, if they just try to access it as if it's a v3 thing, it will. I mean, it's more implicit than explicit, which. But like if you try to access, output.png, you'll say, I'm actually using NB format 4. This should be output image PNG. Show a warning and then, but let it work. And you do that by amending notebook node as like shim notebook node that provides v3 access with warnings to the v4 structure.
Now, we all know that people don't read warning messages. Nobody does. So, one question is...
We could raise unless you pass a allow v3, do a pip style -- allow v3 template.
I would put a 1 minute sleep.
Sure about it.
I would put a 1 minute sleep with I'm going to really annoy you and just do nothing for 1 minute.
Actually do that in PyZMQ. In PyZMQ install, if it's going to build libcmq as an extension that wasn't explicitly requested, there's this big message that says, I'm going to build libcmq as an extension in 10 seconds. If you really want this to happen, you can do --zmq bundled. Yeah. Okay, so I will investigate the shim. That's conclusion from that part.
No, the idea of making it an error by default and allowing people to force it, I don't think we should discount because it's the only way to get people to actually read the freaking message and actually know what's going on. Otherwise, they ignore it, and if we ever remove the shim, then we're just kicking the breakage to another year down the road.
So what about doing that for most of the deprecation and warning we have to IPython, which is IPython, yes, I really want to use deprecated API?
No, I think the existing deprecation stuff is fine for most things. Because if you want, there's already a mode for, you can already, with Python, turn deprecation warnings into errors. So that's a user preference. Yeah. I don't think we should. I don't think it would be appropriate for us to force that on people.
Yeah, that's kind of the stand. But this is a little different. This is basically we're saying, look, we're patching things up for you as we go, but this temporary solution may go away. So we really need you to know that we're doing this because you need to fix your thing before too long. And the only way to communicate that to people is to force them to stop and read it. I mean, even then, people still don't read it, but at least they get an error message and they ask us on the mailing list, and we tell them, go back and read the error message you just pasted.
Okay.
Okay.
The last bit is the last message spec versus output inconsistency that I noticed was rich data messages have two keys. Rich display messages have two keys: data and metadata. Mm-hmm. For output, we take data and we move it up a level. Or sorry, we take the contents of data and we move it up a level. Mm-hmm. So instead of data next to metadata, you have text plain next to metadata. Mm-hmm. So if we want, for the file format to match the message spec, we would just leave those as they are, and so it would be, output.data text plain. And that would also give us better, I think, better way to, if we ever add something to those messages, or add something to those outputs, having them next to data rather than having them next to mime types and having to guess what's a mime type and what isn't.
Mm-hmm. Didn't it make more sense to have mime type data, mime type metadata, instead of having to merge and split?
Say what, Matthias?
So right now, data and metadata have the same shape.
Yep. So
you tend there, for instance, if you display an image with an explicit height and width, there is a data image PNG blah, and then there's a metadata image PNG width equals 5, height equals 10.
Uh-huh.
And then so you need to get the same key out of two dictionaries. And I think Matthias is asking if you want to have one dictionary where you have two key, basically do a transpose of that.
Transpose, yeah, whether to transpose it. Yeah, well, the flip side of that is that on access to each thing, you have to get you'd have to get image PNG dot data, image dot PNG dot metadata, right?
Right.
I don't know.
But we did it this way because we had to add metadata after.
Yeah, we did. It's the way it is because metadata was added.
Uh-huh.
It's not necessarily the way it is because we thought it's the way it should be. Because metadata was added in a backward compatible way.
So would it really be completely uniform that if we do So the idea would be there would be simply mime type, and then mime type would have data and metadata. And each mime type, so the key, if we transpose it, then the keys would be mime types, right? And then and every mime type would have data metadata for each mime type. Am I understanding correctly what it would look like?
Yeah, and although, so metadata can have top-level keys as well. So you can have, I forget, whatever the key is that puts it in an iframe. That's top level, that's not a mime type, that's just a metadata of the output, not a metadata of a particular mime type.
Then it means the idea of transposing doesn't quite work.
Well, it doesn't, it means that there's metadata. Transposing doesn't get rid of the top level metadata, it just gets rid of most of its contents. Most, but not all of its contents.
So the question is really whether we want metadata that's associated with each basically data payload and metadata associated with the entire message, right? Because that's what you're saying, Min. That there would be potentially some metadata keys that apply to the whole message versus metadata keys that apply to each individual line type payload, right? And if that's the case, then the transposition, keeping the top level one, does seem to make a little bit more logical sense. Right? It does seem a little bit more natural to think of, oh, this is the metadata that applies to everybody, and then if I go through the following, the PNG and there's PNG and SVG and there's display data, then I can grab the data and the metadata that lets me know how to render that specific blob. So it's kind of distinguishing between metadata that helps you render that blob versus metadata.
You need both, because this is an implementation detail, but the way it works is you would always need both. You would need to pass the data, the metadata, and the top-level metadata in order to draw each individual output, because we need the isolated key, for instance, can live in both places. It would also, putting the metadata per output would also dramatically increase the number of lines and empty dictionaries in a normal output, because normally they're... So right now we have one data... If we do the simple thing of matching the message spec, there is one data key, one metadata key, and n mime type keys, and potentially n up to n metadata keys. If we push data, if we do the transpose, we will have n data keys and n mime type keys still, n data keys, and n plus 1 metadata keys. So going from n plus 2, you go to 3n plus 1 in terms of just the number of dictionaries in a single output.
Yeah, and those are often going to be empty in many, many cases.
And unless you make the field optional, if the dict is empty, you don't put it in the...
Yeah, no, we could, yeah, that's always true. So my inclination is still probably, my inclination is toward the current state of the message spec, because changing this would also be a big change in the message spec, and I think maybe the Python API for displaying data.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because that blob matches very much the signature of the display data calls.
Now it matches the lower level APIs. The higher level APIs that are more commonly used, I don't think would be effective. But the slightly lower level ones would be strongly effective. So I'm not sure how disruptive that would be. So my current inclination would be to just stop promoting the contents of data, right? Because right now we basically do output.update, output.pop data.
Mm-hmm.
And I would my current inclination is to just stop doing that rather than make a bigger change. But we can keep talking about it if you want.
No, I'd be happy with that. So we would go with the basically the current message spec would become is what the
just change NB format to match message spec.
That sounds sensible to me, and I'm a little fearful of the unforeseen ripples of the other change. I'm not convinced that the transposition is really that big of a benefit, and it may be a ripple of little problems everywhere that we don't really need to deal with.
Yeah,
enough.
Yeah.
Okay. Anybody opposed that idea? All right.
Brian, I just want to do one more point before we leave my domain. That come on, internet. So the multi-user.
Yes. Oh,
So the multi-user, as of yesterday, the multi-user server works and is actually multi-user, which hasn't been true until. So yeah, so it actually spawns single-user servers as users and all that jazz. And may or may not be installable. It at least worked sort of after a bit of help on Fernando's machine. So it works on at least 2 computers. So
very cool.
There's still, I mean, obviously, still a lot of stuff to do on that one, but at least the basic blocks are in place.
Very, very cool.
All right. John, do you want to take the scroll manager one?
Yeah, sure. Scroll Manager is done, as far as I know. If anybody else wants to give it some input, that would be great. Thomas and Paul already kind of gave the thumbs up to Brian and I during the last dev meeting, which went over 2 hours. So if maybe you guys want to look at that and see if you like it or not, either give it a thumbs up or a thumbs down, that would be great.
I made one comment that looks like it was something went a bit wonky in a rebase.
Uh-oh.
But it's a small thing. Otherwise, I'm fine with going for it.
Sweet. Okay, yeah, that's it. We can move on.
Yep. Let's see, Brian. I'm not entirely sure. So Brian asked a question about, so with the message spec updates, we promoted mime bundle to something that we use places other than display calls. And mime bundle is the term Fernando came up with for our little dictionaries of mime type data that we display in various places, including the pager, including the tooltip, including rich display, including widgets, all over the place. And we, in the message spec update, moved object info request to, rather than returning structured data that the front end is responsible for rendering, to building a mime bundle so that the kernel is responsible for rendering tooltips essentially, and then the front end just puts it on the page. And so Brian is concerned about this pattern because of the iframe. The still not yet decided upon possibility of putting all output in iframes would mean that all these mime bundles, including the pager, including the tooltip, would logically go in iframes.
But I don't understand what the issue is with mime bundles going into iframes.
JavaScript.
But I guess I don't fully understand. I don't fully understand what the issue is.
If you're displaying something with JavaScript that is rogue, you can hijack user account and things like that.
Yes. So what I don't understand is if we ultimately end up putting everything in an iframe, and we figured out a way to draw iframes properly, what is the problem with that affecting the tooltip as well as a regular output?
The question of Brian is: should we just put things in iframe? Should we just protect the tooltip?
No. That I understand.
No, it's saying is because logically, by making it a MIME bundle, we should protect the tooltip. His question is, does that mean we shouldn't make it a MIME bundle because putting the tooltip in an iframe is assumed to be bad?
Yeah, and he's just assuming. I've talked to him about this before. He's just assuming that just the idea of having an iframe moving around the document, not embedded.
And I would suspect that if we can get iframes for output to not be horrible, we can get iframes for tooltips to not be horrible, and that it shouldn't really be worse.
Yeah, because the same thing with the pop-out widget, it will have to be an iframe that moves around.
Yep.
So.
The other thing is that tooltip is triggered on user actions, so it's not as important to put it in iframe if we want it to be rich.
It's exactly the same as output, though.
Yeah.
So right now we distinguish between output that's a result of explicit user action and output that's a result of document load. And a tooltip should be treated exactly the same that is an output that's a result of explicit user action, which right now means we don't sanitize it. So we would never sanitize the tooltip. But there are certain benefits to taking the iframe always approach to outputs. It means we don't have to sanitize. It means it's kind of safe by
default.
It's safe at a different level. So and not having to sanitize would definitely be nice. So that's the benefit of using iframes is we can drop sanitization and we can drop trust. We can get rid of the notion of trust. But there are obviously significant costs to iframes, so it remains an open question.
Yeah, but dropping trust means that everybody that implements an alternative front end needs to isolate things by security.
Yep. I'm okay with that.
But it seems like we don't need to make a decision on the MIME bundle thing right now, right?
I don't think so. We can dig into that more when Brian's around, but I don't think there's much for us to do there. Nothing immediate. The general issue of if for some reason a tooltip putting MIME if we iframe all MIME bundles, using MIME bundles in more places means more iframes in more places. If there's a reason why iframes are not a problem in output but they are elsewhere, then that's a reason to backtrack on our MIME bundles everywhere idea. And I think that's the gist of Brian's comment. But I think we don't know enough about the problems of iframes to make that.
Okay. Well,
No. My PR is on a standby right now.
Yeah.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
I dropped out of the call for a second. So hey, Jason, how are you?
Just in time.
Good to see you.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Perfectly. Welcome.
Awesome. Good. We figured out how it works.
So. Go for it. I'm going to take a step back and let you guys enjoy your CSS chat. I mean, I'll be here. I'm not going to drive that conversation.
Jason, do you want me to recap a little bit?
Sure, go ahead.
So we're looking at trying to deprecate or remove / replace the add class and remove class methods. And we talked about this at an earlier meeting, I think last week. And what was it? Yesterday, Brian, Jason, Sylvain, and I had a meeting where we talked a little bit more about this, and we're thinking about there's two paths that we're debating taking, and the first, which Brian favors, is just removing the ability to add or remove classes from DOM widgets at all. So there would be no way to set a class or any way of manipulating the class attribute of the HTML objects. And the other option, oh yeah, go ahead, Jason.
And I think also removing the set CSS as well.
Eventually, yeah.
I think all the backdoors. Yeah.
And the other option is to just instead of doing that, to still leave the backdoor, but just provide it as a single trait that just affects the topmost widget and ignores the issues of synchronization from the front end to the back end, and assumes that all changes to this class list will be made by the user in the back end.
So have a single synced trait that is the class list, and have that be on the top level, and then make sure that the JavaScript, if the JavaScript ever does change it, it triggers the appropriate sync mechanism, and assume that, at least at the base level, the JavaScript won't change it.
Yeah, we're just assuming that the JavaScript will never change it.
But it's because it's a synced trait. If for some reason I had JavaScript that decided to change the class list, couldn't it just do the same since sync is symmetric?
Exactly. Yeah, it could set it through. It could set it through the model, and that would work. But you couldn't use jQuery to.
Well, you could. Yeah, right. You basically use an API that
we provide.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So minuses, of course, are that this provides a backdoor and leaks details of our HTML notebook into the widget infrastructure. And the syncing is sort of kludgy because you have to sort of sync manually if you're doing it on the JavaScript side. And it might as well pull set CSS into the discussion as well, because set CSS is also leaking details about our HTML-based front end. So on the other hand, since we're not omniscient and can't foresee all the possible customizations of our widgets, having these escape hatches makes it easy for someone to do small customizations without having to write a bunch of JavaScript code subclassing our widgets, and Python code to subclass the widgets as well.
Yeah, and the option in Brian's option, what we would do is we would implement explicit traits for every single. Are you still talking, Jason?
No.
Oh, okay.
I think there's a big lag on my video.
Your video's lagging. Okay.
Yeah.
Brian's option, what we would do is we would explicitly implement everything that we could. So like width, height, background, font, those things would be implemented manually as traits and managed manually. And then we would try to get all the use cases possible, and if there were any use cases that weren't possible, we would instruct the user to inherit and add that functionality, like Jason was saying.
So the point is, I think, do we want the escape hatch, or do we want to be more pure and just say these are the 5 traits or whatever that we support? And if we do have it, I think we're agreed that if we have the escape hatch of set CSS / set add remove class, that it should be clearly sort of labeled, this is on your own, this is advanced functionality, you're on your own if you start using this. We support the official width and height and color attributes or something that we provide through our API.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sort of obviously. I think the final decision on this should be made when Brian is here, because he feels. I imagine he feels strongly in one direction. Not having written any of this code myself, I'm just going to lean in as an outsider, but take anything I say with a grain of salt and a small weight coefficient. I'm sort of with Jason and John on this one, in the sense that if I'm understanding you guys correctly, that I would be a little bit weary of trying to capture explicitly kind of a full API coverage this early in the game, when I think we still don't really know what the patterns of usage of this stuff are going to be, and what people really are going to need and what people aren't going to need. And furthermore, in practice, my fear is that if we do that, then we send people with the option of subclassing, which not only is it a bit of a pain, as you guys are saying, it also means that people would end up building sort of fairly complex code to do all these things. And if we later decide that we do want to provide an explicit API in a different direction, they're kind of saddled with all of this fairly complex subclass hierarchy that is actually more brittle. Whereas, yes, the other one is a little bit kludgy, but honestly, we're talking about HTML and CSS here. We're not talking about Haskell type systems, right? HTML and CSS have been useful on the internet and have created sort of the internet by virtue of their sort of unbridled embracing of practicality over purity, and sort of make something work rather than make something that is clean and elegant. And it feels to me, and again, I could be wrong, I didn't write this code and I haven't thought about it as much as you guys have, but it feels to me that trying to put a very clean and proper, strict API model in front of a beast that is meant to live and roam the internet is kind of an exercise in futility. My impression is that these APIs have been successful precisely because people can do anything they want with the DOM. Go ahead, man.
I think part of the question is how customizable from a Python API do we want the vanilla widgets that ship with IPython to be?
Mm-hmm.
And that's because part of the big issue with the widgets is that the scope for IPython, the widgets that ship with IPython, should be extremely and very strictly limited, and that lots of people should be writing JavaScript to make their own widgets.
Should be writing their own.
And I'm not saying that means that custom CSS is out of scope, but we don't need the integer slide widget to be perfectly customizable from Python.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly what one of Brian's points were, that we could kind of take Apple's stance and be the dictators of design, and this is how your widgets are going to look.
This is how our widgets are going to look.
Yeah.
If you want, unlike Apple, the answer is if you want something to behave differently than what we made, you can make it. The other slight concern I have is with the private and unofficial API for direct CSS manipulation, is that private and unofficial are pretty much meaningless.
Yeah.
That if it's useful, people will use it.
Mm-hmm.
And if people use it, they get mad when you break it. It whether there's an underscore at the beginning or not.
Jason said that he would handle all those issues, though.
That's fine.
We could forward them to him.
Here's what I would say. If it really is this private, unofficial, advanced, use-at-your-own-risk thing, you should make sure that all of our docs, you can do everything in all of our examples without calling it.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And our tutorials should not cover it.
Show it. Yeah.
That if it's in order to demonstrate that it really is an advanced feature, we should be able to teach all the things that we want to teach people how to do without using it. Because if we have to use it in the widget tutorials, that's kind of suggesting that they're not really
Official.
that they're not private, they're not advanced, they're just something that you use every day. So
Right.
I think that would be part of communicating the unofficialness.
Well, one way to think about it is people will get themselves into more pain in direct. Is it going to, in the long run, going to produce more perhaps compatibility hassles as we update our own code if they go the subclassing route, because the subclassing hierarchy may change and then we break more of their code? Or it's going to produce more pain if they go the manual manipulation of HTML and CSS class and attributes as we
Our HTML structure might change, in which case all the CSS will break.
Exactly. So which of those two kind of exposes potentially more pain to the users? So rather than an argument of kind of purity of model, we take an argument of impact on the users.
Yeah. So I'm fine with the unofficial approach as long as we really do demonstrate that you don't actually need it,
Sure.
and that essentially the result is it's in, at least at the tutorial level, it is undocumented.
Yeah.
Right. And I think any sort of documentation, maybe only documentation in the source code but not included in the manual, says something like, really, if you're using these a lot, you should think about subclassing and writing your own class to do that the right way. And we leave these in here just for advanced kludgy purposes or whatever. But an encouragement to go ahead and subclass if you find yourself using these a lot. So if you're constantly applying a class to everything, then you should subclass and go ahead and apply that class on the JavaScript side. Or if you're constantly setting the CSS of a certain type of text box, maybe there's semantic information in there that you should subclass and have the semantic information in the subclass. I think having that kind of encouragement is perfectly legitimate and in the not included in manual but documentation in the source code.
Yeah, I'm fine. I'm fine with something like that. Because I think right now the customizing widgets tutorial bits make significant use of set CSS. Is that right?
Yeah, it does. But I mean, we could change that. We would just.
Yeah, no, I think that should be a part of this.
Yeah.
I mean, the tutorial repo is its own thing, but I think part of establish in the in the Python model of there's no such thing as private, there's no such thing as anything like that. That part of the way of communicating that something is for advanced users is making it hard to find.
Or making it so that you have to read the source. Read the source at least.
Yeah, having extensive documentation of it is not the best way to communicate that this is
right
for advanced users.
Jason, did you already meet with Brian in New York, or is that next week?
Next week.
Okay. Because you guys can iterate on this, kind of finish this decision when he's there, and John could join in by phone for that.
Digitally, yeah.
And I should add that I volunteered to handle any support requests. I volunteered to put it up in email autoresponder pointing them to the W3C org CSS standard. So that was Brian's big concern, is that if it's there, you are expected to support it, and you will get bug requests and complaints about CSS, fixing their CSS and stuff like that. And I think it's fine that we don't support that officially.
Okay, so
or something.
We'll send them to your office, and building security will take care of it.
That's right. I really don't have to take care of it. Right. All right. Thanks.
Thanks.
Okay.
Matthias, your label?
Just like there is like almost all PR are need review, and I just wanted to mark PRs that are just already reviewed and just want a third person to look at it.
Let's
It's fine, merge.
Let's just. Can we just call it ready to merge?
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. Done. Good.
Yeah.
Books. We currently have a link to a book on the homepage, and I was contacted by a publisher of another book that is going to come out, actually by the same author, asking to replace that one. And I'd like to basically, before I reply to her, I'd like to have an official policy from the project. And so my proposal is that as we get more books, we make that icon an icon that rotates. So whenever a visitor comes, you potentially get a different one, like we do with the thumbnails for the notebook screenshot, the NB viewer screenshots, where I just took like 10 random thumbnails, and there's a little bit of JavaScript that selects randomly 1 out of 10. So that we kind of serve to the user, to whoever lands a different screenshot for a different book, possibly not equally. Maybe the new ones get kind of 2/3 exposure or something like that. But all books are allowed there. Bye, Jason.
Bye.
All books are allowed, and then the criteria for books that are allowed to be included is that the book is either only or mostly. I mean, it's basically a book dedicated to IPython, not simply a book that mentions IPython in a passing in chapter. And finally, that what we link to is a page on books, a page that has books. So I mean, and Brian is saying that the page is already too crowded, which is absolutely true. The page needs a redesign badly. That's absolutely true. That page is kind of a wall of text. But I would say that books is probably one of the things that does belong in the homepage. We want people to find ways of learning how to use the system, and books are one very good way still of learning how to do things. So I think I would decouple the design of the entire homepage from this decision. I think those are separate. What does that policy sound like to people? Because I think it would be good if we have an official stance, because more publishers are eventually going to come with similar requests, and I think it's better to have a uniform policy. What is the conclusion, and what do we show?
We just should define recent.
What's that?
We just should define recent. Like if you have one book that goes out and one book's 2 weeks after, do you put 2/3 for each book?
Yeah. Well, honestly, one option is just to make it random. Like if there's n books listed, we just do 1/n, and it's really random, and that way we just simplify.
We can, yeah. I would say something like if a book is less than, let's say, 3 months old, then it's in the first 2/3 of the probability distribution.
Yeah, I would start with just a flat random.
I don't want to have to be updating the page too often.
Yeah, unless we want to write JavaScript and have a JSON structure for a release date, takes the current date, and then computes the weight function.
I don't want to make it too complicated. I'm sorry.
And as time goes by, it asymptotically approaches a uniform distribution as all the books become infinitely old.
Exactly. We could write a model for that. We could definitely write a model for that. We can look into that later. We can get that fancy later. Obviously, we can't imagine a distribution that.
I think given the number of books we have, I think a
now
uniform distribution is probably okay. I think given the number of books, the uniform distribution is probably satisfactory.
Be 2 soon. And honestly, I mean, initially, since for now it's going to be 2, we can make it 2/3, 1/3, or something like that, or 3/4, 1/4. That's it. But the question is, in general, how does the policy sound of books that are listed on the front page have to be mostly about IPython, not simply books that mention IPython? And number 2, what we do is simply link to a page that has all of them in chronological reverse order instead. So we have a little books page, and There's just a blurb and a link, like the title, the screenshot, and a link, and that way they're listed one after the other. And we have a page that has the IPython books. That seems pretty uncontroversial.
Yeah, makes sense to me.
And I think the homepage too crowded, that should be just part of the redesign of the homepage in general. And it's one of those things. If we tangle this decision on we first have to rethink the entire website before we can make this decision, then we're never gonna get out of this. Okay, it seems like we're just.
That's the docket.
Sounds good. I guess
Alrighty.
I'll see you guys later.
Thanks, everyone.
Hello, Internet.
Bye.
Bye, everyone. And do you want to close the live button?
Yeah.
Next